Daniel wiped the grease from his hands and leaned back against the metal frame of the shuttle. The sun of this frontier world was setting, painting the clouds in burning orange. He was tired, but his work was never really finished. Machines always needed fixing, and Daniel was the kind of man who could not walk away from a broken engine. The colony around him was small but busy. Humans had landed here only a decade ago, yet the place already looked like a strange mix of Earth and another world. Alien plants grew near human-built homes. Tall stone towers carved by native settlers stood beside steel warehouses imported from Earth. The air was always full of sound, alien voices blending with human laughter, trade calls mixing with the humming of generators. Daniel had grown used to the strange combination. What he had not grown used to was the presence of Myra. She was different from the others of her kind. Most aliens in the colony wore layered robes or armor pieces, always carrying themselves with stiff pride. Myra, however, had a fire in her eyes that made Daniel uncomfortable. Not because he feared her, but because she seemed to look straight through him whenever they crossed paths. Her clan was known for its warriors, and even when she stood still, there was a weight of strength around her. That evening, as the storm alarms rang out, Daniel hurried to finish sealing the shuttle's hatch. The colony's weather system often failed to predict sudden tempests, and once the red lights flashed, everyone rushed for cover. The winds could rip down walls, and the lightning could melt metal. Daniel looked up, squinting as the sky darkened faster than expected. The air turned heavy, charged with energy. He grabbed his tool bag, ready to run for the shelter, when a shadow blocked his path. It was Myra. "You are too slow, human," she said, her voice sharp but steady. Her black hair was tied back, and her armor was half undone from training. She held her spear across her back as if she had no concern for the storm. Daniel let out a tired breath. "And you are too proud to admit danger when you see it?" Her lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. "Then it seems you and I will test who is right. The shelter is far. Walk with me." They set off together, the wind already biting at their skin. Daniel held his tool bag tight while Myra strode ahead with the calm of a warrior. He watched the storm front roll in, a dark wall of clouds that swallowed the horizon. By the time they reached the storm shelter, the first drops of acid rain struck the ground, hissing as they burned tiny holes in the dust. Daniel pulled the heavy door closed behind them and sealed it with the wheel lock. Inside, the shelter was dim, lit only by a small emergency lamp. The air was thick with silence until Myra spoke again. "You humans run from the sky too easily. On my world, storms are met with steel in hand." Daniel dropped his tool bag and sat on the bench against the wall. "On my world, we meet storms with roofs and walls. That way, we live long enough to fight another day." Myra studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes reflecting the dim light. There was no fear in her face, but Daniel noticed a flicker of curiosity. He realized then that for all her pride, she had chosen to enter the shelter with him. She could have stood outside and tested herself against the storm, but she hadn't. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And what did you expect? A man who would tremble at the sight of me? Or one who would talk too much about his strength?" Her voice softened slightly. "But you work with machines as if the universe depends on them, and you answer without fear. That is unusual." Daniel shrugged. "I'm just doing my job. Someone has to keep the colony running." The storm roared outside, shaking the metal walls of the shelter. Myra stepped closer, her tall frame casting a shadow over him. "Perhaps there is more to humans than weakness after all." For the first time that day, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "You'll find that out in time." They stood there, listening to the storm. The world outside was chaos, but in the small shelter, there was an odd calm. Neither spoke again for a while, yet both felt something had shifted between them. The storm might pass in hours, or it might rage all night. But Daniel already knew this was only the beginning. The storm howled outside, pressing against the thick steel walls of the shelter. Each crash of thunder sounded like the sky itself was breaking apart. Inside, the small lamp flickered, but its light was steady enough to show the tension between Daniel and Myra. Daniel sat quietly, sharpening a small tool with a strip of cloth. He had learned long ago that silence often revealed more about people than words. Myra, however, was not one to sit silently for long. "You do not fear me," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the storm's roar. Daniel looked up, confused. "Why should I?" She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Most of your kind avoid me. When I walk into a room, they turn away. When I train, they whisper behind my back. And when I speak, they stumble with their words." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe they see your strength and think you'll crush them." "And you?" she asked. He thought for a moment before replying. "I see your strength, yes. But I also see that you came into this shelter instead of standing outside to prove something. That tells me you are smart enough to choose life over pride. I respect that." Myra's lips curved into a faint smile, but there was no mockery in it this time. She leaned back against the wall, folding her arms. "Perhaps you are not as ordinary as you appear." Daniel let out a small laugh. "I've been called ordinary all my life. Fixing engines doesn't make me special. I'm not a soldier, not a leader, just a man who knows how to keep things running." Myra studied him with a sharp gaze. "On my world, those who cannot fight are cast aside. But you humans, you value all roles. Even one who only repairs machines is respected. That is different." Daniel placed his tool aside and met her eyes. "Maybe that's the difference between us. You measure worth in battles won. We measure worth in how we help each other survive." The shelter shook again as another wave of wind slammed against it. The lamp flickered harder, almost going out. For a second, both were left in near darkness before the light returned. Myra straightened, her hand instinctively reaching for the spear on her back. "If this shelter fails, we will be buried under the storm." Daniel kept calm. "Then it won't fail. These shelters were built to withstand worse than this. Besides, I checked the bolts on the way in." Myra raised an eyebrow. "You trust your machines more than the sky." "I trust my work," he answered firmly. "Every bolt I tightened, every panel I sealed, I trust that it will hold. That's how I survive." For a moment, Myra said nothing. Then she stepped closer and sat opposite him on the bench. The closeness made the space feel smaller, but Daniel did not move away. She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "You humans speak of survival as if it is a strategy. But for my people, survival is earned through strength. A weak body, a weak will, they do not last. And yet here you are, small compared to my warriors, but steady as a stone in the storm." Daniel gave her a tired but honest smile. "Strength is not always in muscle. Sometimes it's in refusing to give up. Even when the storm tries to crush you." Her gaze lingered on him, thoughtful. "Then show me," she said quietly. "Show me how a human proves his strength without lifting a weapon." Daniel hesitated. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she continued, "teach me how you endure. If words are your shield, if patience is your blade, then let me see it. Let me see why you are not afraid of me." The challenge was spoken not with anger but with curiosity. Daniel realized this was not about proving himself to her people, or even to the colony. This was about Myra herself. She wanted to understand why he, unlike the others, did not flinch before her. "All right," Daniel said after a pause. "But it's not about proving strength in one moment. It's about how you choose every moment. Storm or no storm, you keep going. You don't break. You don't surrender. Myra's eyes stayed locked on his. The storm outside roared louder, shaking the walls, but in that moment, neither of them looked away. And so, while the world raged outside, the true storm was happening inside the shelter. A test of will, not of weapons. Myra had issued her challenge, and Daniel had accepted it not with fists, but with resolve. For the first time in her life, Myra wondered if strength could mean something beyond battle scars and victories. Perhaps, she thought, humans had a kind of power she had never known. The storm outside did not calm. Hours passed, and the shelter shook under the endless roar of wind and thunder. Inside, the air grew warm and heavy, the silence broken only by the sound of their breathing. Daniel leaned against the cold wall, his eyes half closed, listening to the storm. He had spent many nights working alone in machine bays, but this silence felt different. It was not the silence of loneliness, it was the silence of waiting. Myra sat across from him, her spear resting on her knees, her gaze steady as always. After a long time, she spoke. You said strength is not muscle, but choice. That is not how my people live. Daniel opened his eyes. How do your people live? Myra's expression shifted, her voice carrying a weight that had not been there before. From the day we are old enough to stand, we are tested. Those who win the tests rise. Those who lose are marked forever. My clan honors warriors, and nothing else. To them, I am valuable because I fight and because I win. Daniel watched her carefully. She had spoken the words with no pride, only fact. He realized then that beneath her sharp tone and proud stance, there was something else, something she rarely admitted. And if you didn't win, he asked softly. Then I would be nothing, Myra said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed the truth. There was a shadow there, the shadow of someone who had never been allowed to fail. Daniel let out a slow breath. That sounds lonely. Her head tilted slightly, as if the word surprised her. Lonely? Yes, Daniel said. If all people see in you is victory, then they don't really see you. They only see what you can do for them. Myra's gaze dropped for the first time. She stared at the floor, silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. On my world, choice is rare. I am not free to walk away. I am not free to be weak. I am not free to simply exist. Daniel sat forward, his tone gentle but firm. Then here, in this shelter, you are free. No one is watching. No one is judging. You can speak as Myra, not as the warrior. The words seemed to strike her. She lifted her eyes, and for a moment, the fierce guard she carried slipped away. And what of you, Daniel? She asked quickly, as if to shift the weight of the moment. What chains do you carry? You said you are ordinary, but your eyes tell another story. Daniel hesitated. He was not used to speaking about himself. Machines were easier than people. Wires and engines never asked questions. But Myra's eyes demanded an answer, and he could not look away. I grew up on Earth, he began. In a city where no one noticed me. My friends became soldiers, explorers, leaders. I stayed behind, fixing things no one cared about. When I came here, I thought maybe I could start over. But even here, I feel the same. Just another man with a tool bag. Myra frowned. Yet you sit before me without fear. That is not the mark of an ordinary man. Daniel gave a small smile. Maybe not. But I don't want to be someone I'm not. I just want to matter, even if it's in small ways. The storm cracked outside, shaking the ground beneath them. Myra leaned closer, her sharp tone replaced with something almost gentle. Perhaps that is why I do not turn away from you. You are not trying to prove yourself. You are simply present. Daniel met her gaze, and for the first time, he felt she was not looking through him, but at him. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with unspoken words, words neither dared to release. Finally, Myra whispered, "Do you ever wish you could choose differently? To walk away from the life given to you?" Daniel thought for a long moment before answering. Yes. But maybe it's not about walking away. Maybe it's about finding someone who sees the parts of you no one else notices. That can change everything. Her breath caught, almost too soft to hear. She turned her head, but not before Daniel saw the flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, not pride, something else. They fell into silence again, but now it was different. Outside, the storm raged without end. Inside, two people from different worlds sat closer than they had before, not in body but in truth. For the first time, Myra had spoken her secret aloud. For the first time, Daniel had admitted his own. And though nothing more was said, both knew the storm outside was not the only one that had broken that night. The storm outside showed no sign of ending. The walls groaned as if they carried the weight of the entire sky, but inside the shelter, it was not the storm that held their attention anymore. It was the silence between Daniel and Myra, a silence that grew heavier with every passing moment. Myra sat upright, her spear resting against the wall, but her eyes were no longer sharp with suspicion. Instead, they were fixed on Daniel with a look that unsettled him, not because it was hostile, but because it was too direct, too curious. Finally, she spoke. "Daniel." He lifted his head. "Yes." Her lips curved into a half smile, but her voice was calm, almost serious. "Finally alone. Do it already." Daniel froze. His first thought was confusion, but the weight of her words pressed into the silence. She was not challenging him to a fight, nor mocking him. There was something deeper in her tone, something that asked not for strength of muscle, but for strength of choice. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Myra leaned closer, her eyes unblinking. "You speak of trust. You speak of freedom. Show me if you mean it. Show me that your words are not just wind." Daniel set his tool bag aside, taking a steady breath. He could see that this was not a game for her. She was testing him, not with blades, not with war, but with something far more dangerous, vulnerability. He nodded slowly. "All right. But I won't prove anything with force. That's not who I am." Myra tilted her head. "Then how?" Daniel stood and stepped toward her. He noticed a cracked section on her shoulder armor, where the storm had flung debris at her earlier. She had not complained, but the damage was clear. He reached out carefully. "May I?" he asked. She gave the slightest nod, though her eyes never left his. Daniel unlatched the broken piece of armor. Beneath it was a scar across her shoulder, old but deep, the kind that spoke of battles survived. He did not stare in awe or fear. Instead, he pulled a small cloth from his bag and gently wiped the dust from her skin. He worked slowly, treating her not as a warrior or a danger, but as a person who deserved care. Myra studied his every move, waiting for him to flinch or hesitate. But he didn't. His hands were steady, his face calm. "You carry scars," Daniel said quietly. "But you don't have to carry them alone." Her breath caught. No one had spoken to her like that before. Her clan admired scars as proof of strength, but never as marks of pain. Yet this human, with no blade, no armor, treated her scars with more respect than all her people combined. When he finished, he stepped back, giving her space. "That's how I prove myself," he said simply. "By choosing to help, even when I don't have to." For a long moment, Myra said nothing. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she reached up and touched the repaired edge of her armor. Her hand lingered there, then lowered to her lap. "You did not mock me," she whispered. You did not look at my scar as weakness. Daniel shook his head. Why would I? It shows you survived. That's strength. Her eyes softened, just slightly. Among my people, scars are trophies. But they are also chains. Each one binds us to battles we never chose. No one ever sees them as you just did. Daniel met her gaze steadily. Then maybe your people have been blind. Maybe strength isn't just in surviving the fight, but in finding someone who understands what it cost. The shelter shook again, dust falling from the ceiling, but neither of them moved. The storm outside no longer mattered. Finally, Myra leaned forward, her voice quiet but filled with meaning. You are not like the others, Daniel. You do not fear me. You do not worship me. You see me. Daniel gave a small, honest smile. That's all I ever wanted, for someone to see me too. The words hung in the air, powerful in their simplicity. Myra's usual sharpness was gone, replaced by something fragile, something rare. For the first time, she let her guard fall. And in that moment, an agreement passed between them without formal words. She had asked him to prove himself, and he had. Not with strength, but with trust. Not with defiance, but with care. The storm would eventually pass, but both knew something had already changed inside the shelter. What began as a test had turned into a bond neither expected. The storm pressed on through the night, its voice rising and falling like some ancient beast outside the walls. Inside the shelter, Daniel and Myra sat in the dim glow of the lamp, their words from earlier still echoing between them. Myra shifted her shoulder, wincing as the cracked armor pressed against her skin. Daniel noticed instantly. He stood, pulling his tool bag closer, and began searching through it. You should let me look at that again, he said firmly. Myra raised a brow. It is nothing. A scratch. Daniel shook his head. I've seen soldiers ignore wounds until they couldn't walk anymore. Even small things can grow dangerous if left alone. Her eyes narrowed, as if debating whether to argue. But finally, with a quiet exhale, she sat straighter and allowed him closer. Daniel removed the broken armor piece fully, exposing the scarred shoulder and fresh bruise underneath. The light revealed what she had tried to hide: faded marks from old battles, layered like history across her skin. Daniel did not flinch. Instead, he carefully cleaned the fresh cut with water from his canteen, then wrapped it with a strip of cloth torn from his own sleeve. His hands were steady, his face calm, showing no disgust or fear. Myra studied him closely. Her people would have either praised her wound as proof of strength or ignored it completely. But this human treated it with quiet care, as if the injury mattered not because it was a battle mark, but because it was hers. No one has done this for me before, she said softly. Daniel looked up. No one. She shook her head. In my clan, warriors stand alone. Scars are lessons. Weakness is hidden. To be tended by another is shameful. Daniel frowned. That's not shameful. Everyone needs someone at some point. No one should have to carry everything alone. Her eyes lingered on him, unreadable. For the first time, Myra's sharp edge seemed to fade completely. She felt something unusual, a sense of safety she had never known. You speak as though you believe it, she whispered. I do, Daniel said. He tied the bandage firmly but gently. Strength isn't about never needing help. It's about trusting the right people when you do. Myra sat in silence, her thoughts heavy. She had been raised to believe trust was weakness, that to lean on anyone was to lose honor. Yet this man, this human with no armor, no blade, no clan, had given her something no warrior ever had, the simple comfort of being cared for. She touched the bandage, her fingers brushing over the fabric. It was not the finest material, but it was his, torn from his own clothing without hesitation. That small act carried more weight than all the victories she had earned. You risked your own comfort for me, she said quietly. Daniel gave a small shrug. Comfort doesn't matter if someone's in pain. If I can help, I will. That's who I am. Her chest tightened at his words. She had faced death without flinching, but this gentle honesty unsettled her in ways she could not name. For the first time in her life, Myra felt what it was like to lower her guard not in defeat, but in choice. And she realized how rare, how powerful, that feeling was. The storm rumbled louder, shaking the shelter again. Daniel sat back down, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked tired, but when his eyes met hers, they carried the same steady warmth as before. Rest if you can, he said. The storm will pass eventually. Myra stared at him for a long moment before speaking. You are not like anyone I have known. My people would call this weakness, but I feel stronger sitting here with you. Daniel smiled faintly. Then maybe your people are wrong. Her lips curved into something close to a smile, rare and fleeting. She leaned back against the wall, but her gaze stayed on him, watching as if he might vanish if she blinked. In that small shelter, with the storm raging beyond, Myra felt safe in a way she had never allowed herself to feel. And Daniel, who had always believed himself ordinary, realized he had given something greater than strength. He had given her trust. That night, as the storm roared, neither admitted aloud what had changed between them. But both knew it. The moment would not fade with the storm. It had carved its place in their lives, like a scar that healed stronger than before. The storm had begun to weaken. The thunder no longer cracked like the world was ending, and the wind outside shifted from a roar to a restless howl. The walls of the shelter stopped trembling, and Daniel knew it would not be long before they could step out. He looked at Myra. She had fallen into a quiet stillness, not asleep, but deep in thought. Her hand still rested lightly on her bandaged shoulder. The dim lamp painted her face in shadows, softening the fierce lines he had grown used to. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed less like a warrior and more like a woman caught between two worlds. Daniel stood and stretched his arms, tired from sitting so long. It sounds like the worst of it is over. We'll probably be able to leave soon. Myra's head turned slowly toward him. Her eyes, usually sharp, now carried something heavier, something uncertain. And then what? She asked. Daniel blinked. What do you mean? When the door opens, you will walk back to your machines. I will walk back to my clan. We will go on as before, as if this night never happened. Her words carried no anger, but a trace of sadness slipped through them. Daniel set his tool bag down and sat again. Do you want it to be as before? Myra hesitated, her jaw tightening. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she whispered, no. The single word hung in the air, heavier than thunder. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm. Then it doesn't have to be. We choose what happens after. Her eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by the simplicity of his reply. To her, choice had always been a rare thing, locked away behind duty and tradition. Yet here this human sat, speaking of choice as if it were as natural as breathing. My people will not understand, Myra said quietly. They will ask why I walked beside a human. They will demand to know why I let you tend my wounds. To them, it will mean weakness. Daniel smiled faintly. Then let them ask. What matters is what you believe. She studied him, her dark gaze searching for something she could not name. And what do you believe, Daniel? He held her gaze without wavering. I believe you're more than the warrior your clan sees. And I believe I'm more than the ordinary man I thought I was. Tonight proved that. Her chest rose and fell with a deep breath. She felt a tension inside her, a pull between everything she had been taught and everything she had just felt. For so long, she had been strong because she had to be. But now, sitting in this shelter with Daniel, She realized strength could also mean letting herself be seen. The shelter groaned as the wind outside weakened further. The storm was ending. Soon, the door would open, and the colony would call them back. Myra closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again with a rare honesty. "I do not want you to walk away." Daniel felt the weight of her words. He did not rush his answer. Instead, he spoke slowly, with the same steadiness he had shown all night. "Then I won't." The silence that followed was not heavy anymore. It was warm, filled with unspoken trust. Myra let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She had faced countless battles, but this was the first time she felt she had truly won something worth keeping. Daniel leaned back against the wall, his eyes still on her. He knew the storm outside had changed nothing in the colony, but inside this shelter, everything was different. When the door finally opened and the fresh, wet air of the morning rushed in, Myra stood. She looked at him, and instead of stepping out first, she extended her hand not as a warrior commanding, but as a woman choosing. Daniel took it without hesitation. Together, they walked out of the shelter. The world outside was washed clean by the storm, but neither of them looked at the sky. Their focus was only on the path ahead, side by side. For the first time, Myra felt free. For the first time, Daniel felt seen. And both knew this was only the beginning. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the land in soft gold. The storm had passed, leaving the colony fresh and quiet. Puddles shimmered across the dirt paths, and the alien towers stood tall, their stone surfaces darkened by the rain. Daniel and Myra stepped out of the shelter side by side. The air smelled of wet earth and clean wind. For a moment, they both stood still, letting the silence of the new day settle over them. But soon the colony stirred. Workers emerged from their homes, children splashed in puddles, and traders carried goods through the streets. And then the eyes turned toward them. Whispers began almost at once. Humans glanced at Myra with unease, wondering why she walked so close to Daniel. Aliens of her clan looked on with sharp curiosity, their gazes heavy with judgment. The sight of a warrior woman returning from the storm beside a human engineer was enough to stir questions that no one dared speak aloud. Daniel felt the weight of those stares. In the past, he might have lowered his head, pretending not to notice. But this time, he didn't. He kept his pace steady, his eyes forward, and his hand close to hers, though not yet touching. He knew what the whispers meant, but he also knew what they had found in the shelter. That mattered more. Myra walked proudly, her shoulders straight despite the bandage beneath her armor. She could feel the disapproval of her people, but she did not waver. Instead, she matched her steps with Daniel's, making it clear to everyone who watched that this was no accident. As they reached the marketplace, an elder of Myra's clan stepped forward. His tall frame blocked the path, and his voice carried authority. "Myra," he said sternly, "you returned from the storm with a human. Explain yourself." The crowd grew quiet. Daniel's heart pounded, but he stood firm. This was her choice now. Myra met the elder's gaze without hesitation. "There is nothing to explain. The storm came, and the human engineer and I found shelter. We endured together." The elder's eyes narrowed. "Endured? You walk beside him as if he is your equal. Do you forget who you are? You are of the warrior clan. He is nothing more than a fixer of machines." Myra's voice was calm but unyielding. "He is not nothing. He is the one who kept the shelter safe, who tended wounds without fear, who stood steady when the storm raged. If that is weakness, then perhaps our people misunderstand strength." Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one had ever heard her speak in such a way, not even to an elder. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to defend himself, but he realized she had already done it for him. The elder's face hardened, but he did not speak again. Instead, he turned away, leaving the crowd buzzing with murmurs. Myra did not look at them. She simply continued walking, her expression steady. Daniel caught up to her, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Myra replied. "If I do not speak, the whispers will decide the truth for me. I will not let others shape what I have chosen." Daniel slowed, her words sinking deep. She had said it clearly: chosen. Not forced, not bound. Chosen. They walked until the crowd thinned, reaching the quieter edges of the colony. There, by a row of machines Daniel had repaired days earlier, they finally stopped. Myra turned to face him fully. "This will not be easy," she said. "My people will question me. Your people will question you. But I will not pretend last night meant nothing. I would rather stand with truth than hide behind silence." Daniel looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "Then we stand together." She held out her hand. This time, it was not the hand of a warrior demanding loyalty. It was the hand of someone offering choice. Daniel took it. And in that small gesture, stronger than any storm, the bond between them was sealed. As the sun climbed higher, the colony moved on with its busy life. But to Daniel and Myra, the world had changed. They were no longer strangers bound by accident. They were something new, something untested, something stronger than fear. Together, they stepped forward, ignoring the whispers that followed. For them, the storm had not ended, it had only cleared the way for a new beginning.